Introduction. Throughout history, some of humanity's greatest ideas were not born in laboratories, libraries, or workshops, but in dreams. From the haunting visions that inspired timeless works of art, to the sudden flashes of insight that unlocked the secrets of science and technology. These moments came in the quiet of the night, when the conscious mind slept and the subconscious spoke. In this video, we will explore the extraordinary true stories of inventions, discoveries, and creations that emerged from dreams and visions, moments when the human mind reached beyond reality to shape the world as we know it. The sewing machine. Elias Howe's dream. In the mid-19th century, sewing was a slow, labor-intensive task, performed entirely by hand. Clothing, upholstery, and textiles relied on the patient work of skilled seamstresses, who could spend hours on even the simplest garment. Many inventors of the time were attempting to mechanize this process. Among them was Elias Howe, an American mechanic and inventor, who had been struggling for years to create a functional sewing machine that could reliably stitch fabric with speed and precision. Howe's early prototypes had promise, but they all suffered from a fundamental problem. The needle design imitated that of a traditional hand needle, with the eye located at the blunt end. This design worked in hand sewing, but in a machine it caused the thread to knot and tangle, making the stitching unreliable. The invention seemed perpetually one step away from success. Frustration grew. Howe was nearly bankrupt, and his family was living in poverty. He had spent countless nights tinkering with gears, levers, and needles, but the final solution refused to appear. And then, at his moment of greatest despair, the answer came to him in a dream. In this dream, Howe found himself captured by a tribe of strange, foreign warriors. They accused him of failing to complete a task, the creation of a perfect sewing machine. If he could not finish it, they threatened he would be executed. The warriors stood around him, each holding a spear, but these spears were unlike any weapon Howe had ever seen. The tips were sharp, but just behind the point each one had a small hole. This detail struck him. In the dream, the warriors seemed to be urging him toward the answer, as though they already knew the solution. Howe awoke with the image burned into his mind. A needle with the eye not at the end, but near the tip. This would allow the needle to pass through the fabric, carrying the thread behind it in a looping motion. That loop could then be caught by a shuttle carrying a second thread, forming a secure lock stitch. The very next day, he redesigned his machine with a needle based on the dream's image. It worked. The fabric fed smoothly through the mechanism, the stitches were tight and even, and the machine could operate at a speed no human hand could match. Howe patented his invention in 1846. Although he faced years of legal battles to protect his rights, the design eventually became the foundation for modern sewing machines. The placement of the eye at the point of the needle is now universal in machine sewing, a direct legacy of the vision that came to him in sleep. It is difficult to know whether the dream was purely the product of his subconscious mind processing years of trial and error, or something stranger, an intuitive leap, a sudden synthesis of all the knowledge he had been accumulating. What is certain is that without it, the sewing machine might have taken many more years to perfect. Elias Howe's story stands as a striking example of how invention can emerge from unexpected places. In his waking hours, he searched endlessly for the solution, but it was in the unguarded state of dreaming that his mind was able to break free from old patterns and present the answer in a vivid, unforgettable image. From that night on, the design of the sewing machine would never be the same. The periodic table. Dmitri Mendeleev's vision. In the winter of 1869, Dmitri Mendeleev was a man consumed by a single monumental challenge: to bring order to the growing chaos of chemistry. The 19th century was an age of rapid scientific discovery. Chemists across Europe were identifying new elements at an unprecedented rate, each with its own properties, atomic weight, and chemical behavior. But there was no system, no guiding structure that tied these elements together. They existed as a scattered collection of facts, a patchwork of knowledge with no unifying principle. Mendeleev, a professor at the University of St. Petersburg, was determined to find that principle. He believed that the elements were not random, but followed a hidden order. In his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and glass vials, he began an exhaustive process of cataloging. On separate cards, he wrote the name, atomic weight, and properties of each known element. He arranged them in rows and columns, searching for patterns. For weeks, he worked with obsessive focus, shifting the cards around, grouping and regrouping, trying to make sense of the data. He noticed that certain chemical properties repeated at regular intervals when the elements were arranged by increasing atomic weight. This was the key, the periodic nature of their behavior. But no matter how he organized the cards, there were still gaps. The patterns were there, but they were incomplete. On the night of February 17, 1869, exhausted from his relentless work, Mendeleev fell asleep at his desk. And in his sleep, something extraordinary happened. He later described it in simple terms. I saw in a dream a table where all the elements fell into place as required. Awakening, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper. In his vision, the elements arranged themselves naturally into a table. Each row represented a sequence of increasing atomic weights, and each column grouped elements with similar chemical properties. The empty spaces were not mistakes, they were predictions. The dream showed him that these gaps were placeholders for elements that had not yet been discovered. When he awoke, Mendeleev wrote down the arrangement exactly as he had seen it. The result was the first version of the periodic table of elements. It was not merely a catalog of known substances, but a map of matter itself, one that pointed toward the unknown. He confidently predicted the existence and properties of several missing elements, which he named provisionally e.k.a. boron, e.k.a. aluminum, and e.k.a. silicon. In the years that followed, these predictions came true with remarkable precision. Gallium, scandium, and germanium were discovered, each matching Mendeleev's forecasts almost perfectly. This validation transformed his table from an interesting idea into one of the most powerful tools in the history of science. The periodic table became more than a chart. It was a key to understanding the fundamental structure of the natural world. Chemists could now see relationships between elements at a glance, predict how they would react, and even anticipate the properties of substances that had not yet been found. Mendeleev himself was modest about the dream, attributing it to the accumulation of knowledge and the work of his subconscious mind. But whether it was a flash of intuition or a deep mental synthesis that could only emerge in sleep, the result was the same. That brief vision changed the course of chemistry forever. Today, the periodic table hangs on the walls of classrooms and laboratories across the world. Its grid of symbols is instantly recognizable, but behind its simplicity lies a story of relentless curiosity, sleepless nights, and one transformative dream. Mendeleev's moment of clarity in 1869 remains a testament to the strange and powerful ways the human mind can find order in chaos, even while at rest. The structure of Benzene, Auguste Kekulé's dream. In the mid-19th century, organic chemistry was still in its formative years. Scientists were discovering new compounds, cataloging their properties, and attempting to understand how atoms were arranged within molecules. But there was a particular problem that puzzled chemists: the structure of benzene. Benzene, a colorless liquid with a distinctive aromatic odor, had been isolated in 1825 by Michael Faraday. Chemists soon realized it was an important substance, forming the basis for a wide range of dyes, solvents, and other industrial chemicals. Its molecular formula, C6H6, was well established, but that formula presented a mystery. With 6 carbon atoms and 6 hydrogen atoms, benzene seemed unable to fit into the known patterns of chemical bonding. According to the understanding of the time, carbon atoms form straight or branched chains. Yet the properties of benzene did not match any structure that could be drawn this way. By the 1860s, Auguste Kekulé, a German chemist, had already made important contributions to the understanding of carbon bonding. He was one of the first to propose that carbon atoms could link together to form chains, a foundational idea in organic chemistry. But benzene remained an enigma for him. Years of thought brought no clear answer. He could describe its reactivity, its stability, its behavior in reactions, but not its true arrangement of atoms. One evening, after long hours of work, Kekulé sat before his fireplace, his mind wandering in a half-dreaming state. As the flames flickered, he imagined atoms dancing before him, twisting and turning like living things. He had seen such visions before, but this time the patterns shifted into something new. In his own later account, he described the moment. The atoms formed into long chains, and then one of the chains began to coil like a snake. It twisted further until the snake caught its own tail, forming a closed loop. The image was striking, a serpent devouring itself, a shape known since antiquity as the Ouroboros. In that instant, Kekulé realized that benzene's mystery could be explained if its 6 carbon atoms formed a ring rather than a chain. He awoke fully from his reverie, seized by the clarity of the idea. A hexagonal ring of carbon atoms, each bonded to a single hydrogen atom, would account for the formula C6H6. It would also explain benzene's unusual stability, since the electrons in the bonds could be shared across the ring in a way that made the molecule less reactive than expected. The next day, Kekulé began working out the details, translating the dreamlike vision into a concrete chemical model. In 1865, he published his ring structure for benzene, a proposal that would prove to be one of the most important breakthroughs in organic chemistry. Although later refinements, such as the concept of resonance, would further explain benzene's behavior, Kekulé's ring model provided the essential foundation. The story of the Ouroboros dream became famous, not only as a turning point in chemistry, but as a reminder of the strange paths to discovery. Kekulé himself encouraged young scientists to learn how to listen to their own unconscious minds, to allow ideas to surface when the conscious mind was at rest. "Let us learn to dream," he once told his students, "and then perhaps we shall learn the truth." Whether the image of the snake truly appeared exactly as he later described, or whether the tail was shaped over time, its symbolic power is undeniable. The coiled serpent had been a symbol of eternity and cycles for centuries, and in Kekulé's vision, it became the key to unlocking the architecture of one of chemistry's most important molecules. Today, the hexagonal ring of benzene is a basic symbol of organic chemistry, printed in textbooks, drawn on chalkboards, and used as the foundation for understanding aromatic compounds. It is easy to forget that this now familiar structure was once a leap into the unknown, sparked not in a laboratory experiment, but in a fleeting moment of dream-born imagery beside a fire. Kekulé's insight, like so many great discoveries, was the product of years of careful thought, and one brief moment when the mind, freed from conscious control, revealed an answer it had been seeking all along. Google algorithm, Larry Page's dream. In the mid-1990s, the internet was already beginning to transform the way people communicated and shared information. Websites were appearing by the thousands every day, but there was a fundamental problem. Finding anything specific was becoming increasingly difficult. Search engines existed, but they were crude by today's standards. Most of them relied on simple keyword matching, producing lists of results without any clear sense of relevance or quality. For a user, the process often meant wading through dozens of unrelated or low-value pages before finding something useful. Larry Page, a graduate student at Stanford University, had been thinking deeply about this problem. Along with his fellow student Sergey Brin, he had been studying the structure of the World Wide Web, not just as a collection of pages, but as a vast network of interconnected documents. Larry had the idea that the links between pages could hold valuable information. If one page linked to another, perhaps it was a kind of recommendation, an indication of trust or importance. The more incoming links a page had from reputable sources, the more likely it was to be valuable. But how could such a concept be turned into a working system? The web was huge and growing every minute. The task of collecting and analyzing all the links between pages seemed impossible to solve efficiently. Larry spent weeks thinking about algorithms, mathematics, and network theory, looking for a way to bring the pieces together. The ideas were there, but scattered like puzzle pieces that refused to lock into place. Then came a night in 1996. Larry Page was asleep in his dorm room, his mind still occupied with thoughts of the web and its structure. In a dream, he saw something strange and vivid. He imagined being able to download the entire internet onto his computer. Every page, every link, every connection. It was an overwhelming vision, the web unfolding before him as a vast map of relationships. In the dream, he saw himself examining these connections mathematically, assigning values to each link, measuring the importance of a page not by its content alone, but by how many other important pages pointed to it. When he awoke, the image was still clear in his mind. Most people would dismiss such a vision as impossible, but Larry felt a spark of certainty. He began sketching notes, crude diagrams of nodes and arrows representing pages and their links. The dream had crystallized his thinking. Instead of simply searching for words on pages, a search engine could analyze the relationships between pages, ranking them by a numerical measure of importance. That measure would become known as PageRank, named both for Larry Page and the concept of ranking web pages. The principle was simple yet revolutionary. A page's rank depended not just on the number of links pointing to it, but also on the rank of the pages providing those links. In other words, a link from a respected, authoritative site was worth far more than a link from an obscure or irrelevant one. Page and Brin began coding a prototype search engine using this idea. They called it Backrub at first, because it analyzed the backlinks of the web. It was crude compared to modern systems, but even in its early form, it outperformed existing search engines by a remarkable margin. Users could type in a query and find high-quality, relevant results near the top of the list, something that seemed almost magical at the time. By 1998, the project had grown into what would become Google. The name itself was inspired by the mathematical term Google, meaning a 1 followed by 100 zeros, reflecting the company's mission to organize the vastness of the web. From its earliest days, Google's strength lay in the algorithm born from Larry's vision, a way of understanding the internet not as isolated pages, but as a living network of connections. The dream that sparked PageRank was not the sole cause of Google's creation. Years of study, collaboration, and refinement were necessary to turn the concept into a working system. But without that one night, when the structure of the web presented itself as a navigable map in Larry's mind, the leap might have taken much longer. Today, PageRank has evolved and been joined by countless other algorithms, but its influence remains. Modern search engines still rely on the principle that the value of information is shaped by the network of relationships that surrounds it. And though the web is now unimaginably larger than in 1996, the core idea that came to Larry Page in a dream still underpins the way billions of people find information every day. It is a reminder that sometimes, the mind's most complex problems are solved not at the desk, under the bright light of conscious effort, but in the quiet, unguarded hours when thought drifts freely, and the impossible briefly seems possible. The Singer sewing machine improvement, Isaac Singer's dream. In the mid-19th century, the sewing machine was still a relatively new invention. Elias Howe had already patented his groundbreaking design, but like all pioneering machines, it had limitations. The earliest sewing machines were slow, cumbersome, and prone to mechanical problems. They could stitch fabric faster than any seamstress, but they lacked the smooth, continuous operation that would make them practical for widespread use. Isaac Merritt Singer, an American inventor and entrepreneur, had a natural instinct for machinery. Born in 1811 in upstate New York, he had spent much of his early life working with tools, building devices, and repairing equipment. By the time he encountered the sewing machine, he had already designed a rock drilling machine and several woodworking tools. When he first saw Howe's sewing device in operation, he was intrigued. The concept was sound, but Singer immediately saw room for improvement. Singer set out to build his own version, one that could be more reliable and far easier to operate. He worked day and night in his workshop, experimenting with adjustments to the needle, the shuttle, and the tension mechanisms. Yet he kept encountering the same problem. The thread would often break or tangle, and the movement of the needle lacked the smooth, rhythmic motion that would allow the machine to run continuously. For weeks, Singer wrestled with the problem. He tried dozens of mechanical configurations, sketched new designs, and tested small changes in angles and timing. Nothing seemed to solve the issue completely. Fatigued and frustrated, he eventually put his tools down for the night and went to sleep, still thinking about the problem. That night, Singer had a dream, vivid and mechanical in its imagery. In it, he watched a sewing machine operating flawlessly. He could see every part moving in perfect coordination. The needle descended rapidly, the shuttle moved with precise timing, and the fabric advanced smoothly under the presser foot. The sound was steady, like the ticking of a clock. In the dream, Singer noticed that the needle moved not vertically in a fixed motion, but in a way that allowed for continuous, fluid stitching, almost as if the mechanism had been alive, adjusting itself to the work. When he awoke, the vision was still sharp in his mind. He realized that the key was not in overcomplicating the design but in refining the timing and motion of the shuttle and needle so they worked together seamlessly. He began reworking his machine, incorporating what he had seen in his sleep. He repositioned parts for better coordination, adjusted the path of the thread, and altered the way the needle penetrated the fabric. The result was a machine that could sew continuously with far fewer interruptions. It used a straight needle with the eye near the point, similar to Howe's original concept, but paired with an improved shuttle system that allowed for much faster, smoother stitching. This design not only increased efficiency but also reduced the strain on the thread, preventing frequent breakage. In 1851, Singer patented his version of the sewing machine. It was more than just a mechanical improvement, it was a leap forward in usability. His machine could sew 900 stitches per minute, a remarkable speed for the time. More importantly, it was durable, relatively easy to maintain, and adaptable to different types of fabric. Singer was not only an inventor but also a master of marketing. He aggressively promoted his machine to both factories and households, introducing installment payment plans to make it affordable for ordinary families. The improvements he introduced, some inspired directly by his dream, turned the sewing machine from a niche industrial device into a household essential. While Howe's original patent laid the foundation, it was Singer's refinements that made the sewing machine a transformative tool in everyday life. The combination of mechanical insight, entrepreneurial drive, and a flash of inspiration in sleep created a product that would change the clothing industry forever. The dream that guided Isaac Singer may not have been as symbolically striking as Elias Howe's vision of warriors with spears, but it carried the same essential truth. Sometimes the mind, when freed from conscious struggle, finds the most elegant solutions. The clear, mechanical images that came to Singer during the night were enough to break through weeks of frustration. Today, Singer's name is so closely associated with sewing machines that many people assume he invented them outright. In truth, he perfected them, and a single night's dream played a quiet but decisive role in making that possible. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's nightmare. In the summer of 1816, a group of young writers and thinkers gathered at a villa on the shores of Lake Geneva. Among them were the poet Lord Byron, the physician John Polidori, the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, and an 18-year-old woman named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, who would later be known as Mary Shelley. The weather that year was strange and unseasonable, the result of the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815, which had thrown vast amounts of ash into the atmosphere. The sun was dim, the days were cold, and storms rolled over the lake almost constantly. It became known as the year without a summer. Confined indoors by rain and gray skies, the group entertained themselves with readings and discussions. They spoke of science, philosophy, and the boundaries of human knowledge. One evening, the conversation turned to recent experiments in electricity and the possibility of reanimating dead tissue. The works of Luigi Galvani and Giovanni Aldini, who had demonstrated that electric currents could cause the muscles of dead animals, and even human corpses, to twitch and contract, fascinated them. The discussion was intense, mixing genuine scientific interest with a taste for the macabre. It was Lord Byron who proposed a challenge. Each member of the group would write a ghost story. Over the next days, they struggled to find inspiration. Mary, in particular, felt the pressure. Surrounded by great literary figures, she wanted to create something worthy of the company. Yet nothing came to her until one night, after a long evening of conversation. She went to bed with her mind still full of the talk of science, life, and death. That night, Mary had a dream, or as she later described it, a waking dream. In it, she saw a pale student of unhallowed arts, kneeling beside a lifeless figure. She watched as the student applied the forces of science to his creation. Slowly, under the influence of some hidden power, the limbs began to stir. The eyes opened, the creature breathed, and instead of joy, there was horror at the thing that had been made, horror at the reversal of nature's laws. The image was vivid and terrifying. Mary woke with her heart pounding, the dream still unfolding in her mind. She later wrote that she saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life, and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. It was not just the creature that stayed with her, but the emotional weight of the scene, the awe, the revulsion, and the question of whether creation could be justified simply because it was possible. The next morning, she began to write. The story took form quickly, at first as a short tale for Byron's contest, but it soon grew beyond its initial bounds. Over the following months, it expanded into a full novel, blending Gothic horror with scientific speculation. In Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, Victor Frankenstein is the ambitious young scientist who discovers the secret of life and constructs a living being from dead tissue. But the creature he makes, though intelligent and capable of emotion, is rejected for its appearance and becomes a source of tragedy and destruction. Mary Shelley's novel was first published anonymously in 1818. Many assumed it was written by Percy Shelley, but over time Mary was recognized as its true author. The book was unlike anything else of its time. It was a story born from a nightmare, but also deeply informed by the scientific and philosophical debates of the early 19th century. The dream that gave rise to Frankenstein has become part of literary history. It illustrates how the subconscious mind can synthesize ideas, experiences, and emotions into a single, powerful vision. Mary had absorbed the mood of that dark summer, the intellectual ferment of her companions, and the unsettling possibilities of modern science. And in sleep, her mind combined them into an unforgettable image. 2 centuries later, Frankenstein remains one of the most influential works of literature. It has inspired countless adaptations in film, theater, and art. More importantly, it continues to serve as a cultural touchstone for discussions about science, ethics, and responsibility. The idea of the Frankenstein complex, the fear that scientific creation will turn against its creator, can be traced directly back to the dream of an 18-year-old woman in a stormy Swiss summer. Mary Shelley herself acknowledged the strange power of that night's vision. "What terrified me will terrify others," she wrote, "and I need only describe the specter which had haunted my midnight pillow." With those words, she transformed a fleeting nightmare into a lasting work of art, one that bridges the worlds of imagination and the unsettling realities of human ambition. The Nightmare by Lake Geneva stands as a reminder that dreams, even those that disturb us, can become the seeds of creation. In Mary Shelley's case, it was the birth of a story that would outlive its author, and like its own fictional creature, walk the earth in countless forms for generations to come. The DNA double helix, James Watson's dream. In the early 1950s, the scientific world was in the midst of an intense race. The greatest minds of biology and chemistry were striving to uncover the true structure of DNA, the molecule that carried the blueprint of life itself. For decades, scientists had known DNA existed, but its exact form remained a mystery. Many imagined it as a long, tangled chain, or perhaps a flat, ladder-like structure. But the key to understanding life's instructions lay hidden in the way its atoms were arranged, and that secret was proving elusive. James Watson, a young American biologist working at the University of Cambridge, was one of those chasing the answer. Alongside him was Francis Crick, an equally determined and outspoken English scientist. They were not alone in the hunt. At King's College London, Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins were conducting groundbreaking X-ray diffraction experiments, producing images that hinted at DNA's hidden geometry. The competition between the two research teams was fierce, each pushing for the discovery that could change biology forever. Watson, by his own admission, was struggling to see the solution clearly. He had seen Rosalind Franklin's famous photograph 51, an X-ray image that suggested a repeating helical pattern, but the precise arrangement of the molecule's bases remained unclear. Late nights of discussion and modeling had led to frustration. And then, one night, the answer came to him in the most unexpected way, in a dream. Watson dreamed of 2 long, elegant chains winding around one another, like a graceful spiral staircase stretching into infinity. In the dream, these chains were connected by pairs of shapes, each fitting perfectly with its partner, adenine with thymine, cytosine with guanine. The image was so vivid that when he awoke, he could still see the spirals in his mind, their symmetry and balance almost mesmerizing. It was not just the shape that struck him, but the logic of the pairing. Each rung of this twisted ladder was held together by a precise chemical match, ensuring perfect replication. The next morning, Watson rushed to the Cavendish laboratory to share his vision with Crick. Together, they began assembling a physical model, carefully positioning each component to match the dream's geometry. Piece by piece, the double helix took shape, two strands coiling around each other, bound by base pairs that followed the rules Watson had seen in his sleep. When the model was complete, it seemed to explain everything. How DNA could store vast amounts of genetic information, how it could be copied with incredible accuracy, and how small errors could lead to variation and evolution. In 1953, Watson and Crick published their findings in Nature, unveiling the double helix to the world. The paper was brief, just over a page long, but its impact was immeasurable. It marked a turning point in modern biology, setting the stage for everything from genetic engineering to forensic science. Although Watson's dream was just one moment in a much larger story involving many contributors, it was a spark of clarity that guided the final leap from scattered data to a complete vision. The image of the intertwined strands became an icon of science, representing not only the complexity of life, but also the mysterious ways in which inspiration can strike. In the case of James Watson, the structure of DNA was not just the result of relentless research and collaboration. It was also a gift from the quiet, unguarded moments of the mind, where dreams can illuminate the path to discovery. Alternating current generator, Nikola Tesla's vision. In the late 19th century, electricity was transforming the world. Streets were being illuminated by electric lamps, factories were beginning to hum with electrically powered machinery, and inventors were competing to define the future of power distribution. At the center of this technological revolution stood two rival visions. Thomas Edison, the tireless promoter of direct current, DC, believed electricity should be delivered in steady, one-directional flow over short distances. His system was already being implemented in parts of New York. But direct current had a severe limitation. It could not easily be transmitted over long distances without enormous loss of power. Into this arena stepped Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-born inventor with an almost supernatural sense for engineering. Tesla's mind worked in ways that baffled those around him. He could construct machines entirely in his imagination, test them mentally, and know whether they would function without ever touching a piece of metal. Yet despite his brilliance, Tesla had struggled to gain recognition in America. For a time, he worked for Edison himself, but their partnership quickly dissolved when Tesla proposed an entirely different electrical system, alternating current, AC. Alternating current was not new as a concept, but Tesla saw how it could be harnessed with far greater efficiency than DC. In AC, the flow of electricity reverses direction many times per second, allowing it to be transmitted over vast distances with minimal loss. The challenge was to design generators and motors that could exploit this principle efficiently and reliably. The breakthrough came not in the laboratory, but in a moment of pure vision. In 1882, Tesla was walking through a park in Budapest with his friend Antal Szigeti. The sun was setting, and the rhythmic motion of the shadows seemed to stir something deep within Tesla's mind. As they spoke, Tesla recited lines from Goethe's Faust. "The glow retreats, done is the day of toil." And then suddenly he stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened. In that instant, an image appeared before him as vividly as if it were floating in the air. Tesla later described it as if a curtain had been drawn aside in his mind. He saw, in perfect detail, the design of a rotating magnetic field, the key to building an efficient alternating current generator. The machine in his vision was complete. Coils, armature, rotor, and all, each part moving in harmony to convert mechanical energy into electrical power. The idea was so clear that he began sketching it in the dirt with a stick, explaining the principle to Szigeti right there in the fading light. Over the following months, Tesla's mental model remained so precise that he built and refined the generator entirely in his head. He later recalled that he would run the machine in his imagination for weeks at a time, observing where wear would occur, making corrections and starting the process over, all without lifting a single tool. By the time he finally built the first physical prototype, it worked exactly as he had envisioned, without a single change from the original design in his dreamlike vision. Tesla's alternating current generator became the foundation of a complete AC power system. When paired with transformers, it allowed electricity to be generated in one location and delivered hundreds of miles away, bringing light and power to rural towns, factories, and cities alike. The invention caught the attention of industrialist George Westinghouse, who saw in Tesla's system the future of power distribution. Together, Tesla and Westinghouse challenged Edison in what became known as the War of the Currents. Edison fought fiercely, spreading fear about the dangers of AC and even staging public demonstrations in which animals were electrocuted to show its supposed risks. But the technical superiority of Tesla's system was undeniable. In 1893, Tesla's alternating current was chosen to power the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a dazzling display that lit the fairgrounds with more than 100,000 electric lamps, powered by massive AC generators. 2 years later, his system was used to harness the energy of Niagara Falls, sending power to Buffalo, New York, over 20 miles away, an achievement many had deemed impossible. The alternating current generator was more than just a machine. It was the physical embodiment of Tesla's unique creative process. Unlike many inventors who relied on trial and error, Tesla often spoke of his ideas arriving fully formed, as if transmitted from another realm of thought. He would later say that this vision in Budapest was one of the most profound moments of his life, a moment when the future unfolded before him in a single flash. Tesla's AC system became the global standard, powering homes, cities, and industries across the world. To this day, nearly every modern power grid operates on the same principles he envisioned in that park decades earlier. The rotating magnetic field, born in a moment of poetic inspiration, remains one of the fundamental concepts of electrical engineering. In telling the story of Tesla's alternating current generator, we see more than just an engineering milestone. We witness the rare fusion of science and vision, the way a sudden, almost dreamlike image can reshape the physical world. Tesla's insight bridged the gap between imagination and reality, proving that the human mind, in its most inspired moments, can generate revolutions as powerful as the machines it creates. The Beatles' yesterday, Paul McCartney's dream. In the mid-1960s, the Beatles were already a global phenomenon, shaping the sound of a generation. Yet among their most famous songs, one stands apart, not only for its delicate simplicity but also for the strange way it entered the world. Yesterday, now one of the most covered songs in history, did not begin with a conscious effort at composition. Instead, it emerged fully formed in Paul McCartney's mind, while he was asleep. McCartney recalls waking up one morning in the small attic room of his girlfriend Jane Asher's family home in London. The year was 1964. In those days, the Beatles were constantly on the move, juggling concerts, interviews, and studio sessions. It was a rare moment of stillness. As he opened his eyes, a melody was already playing in his head, complete, structured, and hauntingly beautiful. Still half asleep, McCartney walked to a nearby piano and began playing the tune to capture it before it faded. The chords were gentle yet deeply moving, with a sense of longing that seemed to come from another time. He quickly worked out the melody and added placeholder lyrics to help remember it. Those temporary words, "scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs," were far from poetic, but they served the practical purpose of holding the song together until he could find the real lyrics. The experience puzzled him. Where had the song come from? It felt too perfect, too polished to be entirely his own creation. Musicians often work for days, weeks, or months refining a melody, but this one had arrived whole, as if delivered by some unseen hand during the night. For weeks afterward, McCartney carried the song in his head and played it to friends, fellow musicians, and anyone in the London music scene who might recognize it. He feared that he might have accidentally copied it from another composition he'd heard long ago. One by one, people assured him they had never heard it before. George Martin, the Beatles' producer, confirmed it was original. Gradually, McCartney began to accept that the melody was indeed his own, born in the strange, fertile space between dreaming and waking. But Yesterday was not an immediate Beatles song in the traditional sense. At that time, The band was known for their energetic rock and roll sound, rich with harmonies and electric guitars. This new tune was different, soft, intimate, and best suited for a single voice accompanied by acoustic guitar or piano. For months, McCartney kept it in his back pocket, unsure how or when to use it. When recording sessions for the album Help began in 1965, he finally decided to bring the song into the studio. George Martin suggested an unusual arrangement for a Beatles track, a string quartet to accompany McCartney's vocals and guitar. This stripped-down setting allowed the melody to shine in its purest form. The other Beatles agreed, though Yesterday became the first song in their catalog recorded by only one member of the band. The final version, just over 2 minutes long, was a masterpiece of restraint. McCartney's voice carried a quiet ache, while the strings added a timeless, almost classical quality. When it was released, it was unlike anything the band or popular music had produced before. Yesterday quickly captured hearts around the world. It topped charts, was praised by critics, and resonated with listeners of all ages. Over the decades, it became the most recorded song in history, with thousands of versions by artists in every imaginable genre. Its universal appeal lay in its simplicity and emotional honesty, qualities that often elude deliberate craftsmanship but seem to flow naturally from dream-born inspiration. McCartney himself has often reflected on the mysterious way the song came to him. Science has long noted the connection between dreams and creativity. In sleep, the brain makes associations it might never form in waking life, freely combining fragments of memory, emotion, and imagination. For McCartney, the result was a melody that seemed to bypass the conscious mind entirely, arriving as a complete gift. Even decades later, when asked about Yesterday, he still recalls that strange morning when he woke with music already playing inside his head. It remains a reminder that creativity can emerge not just from hard work and practice, but also from the deep, uncharted waters of the subconscious. And so, Yesterday stands as both a musical landmark and a testament to the mysterious power of dreams. A song that came into being without struggle, carrying with it the quiet, perfect clarity of inspiration found in sleep. The Terminator, James Cameron's fever dream. In the early 1980s, James Cameron was far from the acclaimed director he would one day become. He was a young filmmaker with a burning imagination, working on small projects and struggling to break into Hollywood. His breakthrough came not from careful planning or industry connections, but from a strange and feverish vision born in the depths of illness. At the time, Cameron was in Rome, working on a troubled low-budget horror sequel. The production was chaotic, plagued with disagreements and poor working conditions. Worse still, Cameron had fallen seriously ill with food poisoning. He returned to his tiny hotel room late at night, sweating, shivering, and drifting in and out of consciousness. It was in this fevered state that the dream came. He saw with startling clarity a vivid and terrifying image. A chrome skeleton, humanoid in shape but stripped of flesh, emerging from fire and smoke. Its red eyes glowed with a mechanical malice. It moved with an unstoppable, inhuman precision, slow, deliberate, and entirely without mercy. This figure was not just a machine, but something relentless, an embodiment of inevitable destruction. Cameron woke in a cold sweat. The image was burned into his mind. In that half-conscious haze, he knew it was more than just a nightmare. It was the seed of a story. Still weak and feverish, he began to sketch the skeletal figure he had seen, capturing every detail. The exposed pistons, the metal skull, the predatory gaze. When he returned to the United States, that dream image stayed with him. Cameron began to weave a narrative around it. What if this machine wasn't just a monster, but something from the future, sent back in time with a mission? What if it was designed to look human so it could infiltrate and destroy without warning? And who would stand against it? Piece by piece, the story began to take shape. In Cameron's mind, the machine was a Terminator, an assassin from a future where artificial intelligence had risen against humanity. The last survivors were fighting a desperate war against the machines, and in a last-ditch effort, the enemy had sent this Terminator back in time to kill the mother of the future resistance leader, before that leader could even be born. The fever dream had provided the image, but Cameron's storytelling instincts built the framework around it. He imagined a grimy, neon-lit future scarred by war, contrasted with the more familiar 1980s streets where most of the action would take place. He combined science fiction with relentless suspense, inspired by both classic horror films and modern action thrillers. At first, the idea seemed too ambitious for a new director with no major box office success. But Cameron was undeterred. He created a rough script and pitched it to producers. One of the first believers in the project was Gale and Hurd, who would become both his producing partner and his collaborator in shaping the screenplay. Together, they refined the story, giving it its now iconic structure. A desperate chase, a predator that never stops, and a heroine who transforms from an ordinary woman into a fighter. Casting the lead role of the Terminator was a challenge. Originally, the idea was for the assassin to blend in perfectly with humans, making him more of an unremarkable figure. But when Arnold Schwarzenegger entered the conversation, everything changed. His imposing physique, stoic presence, and unique charisma reshaped the character into the unstoppable juggernaut the world now knows. In 1984, The Terminator was released. With its modest budget, the film relied on tight pacing, practical effects, and Cameron's visual ingenuity. The nightmare-born image of the chrome skeleton made its way onto the screen in the climactic scenes, terrifying audiences just as it had terrified Cameron in his fever dream. The movie became a sleeper hit, praised for its intensity and originality. More importantly, it established Cameron as a bold new voice in science fiction cinema. The fever dream in that small Italian hotel room had grown into a cultural phenomenon, spawning sequels, television series, comics, and countless homages in popular culture. Looking back, Cameron has often acknowledged the strange origin of the Terminator. He has spoken about how the image of the skeletal machine emerging from the flames came to him fully formed, a vision that bypassed conscious invention. In many ways, the dream worked like a lightning strike of inspiration, one that gave him not just a story, but a career-defining idea. From a scientific perspective, the link between fever dreams and heightened creativity is well documented. High temperatures and illness can push the brain into altered states, where the boundaries between memory, imagination, and hallucination blur. In this space, the mind can make unexpected connections, combining elements from past experiences, visual stimuli, and subconscious fears into something entirely new. For Cameron, the fever was a catalyst. It stripped away the everyday noise of conscious thought and allowed a single, striking image to rise to the surface. That image would go on to shape one of the most iconic science fiction films of the 20th century. Today, The Terminator is remembered not just as a thrilling movie, but as a testament to how inspiration can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. In a small, dimly lit hotel room, with fever racing through his body, James Cameron dreamed of the future. And in that dream, he saw a machine that would change cinema forever. The theory of relativity inspiration, Albert Einstein's dream. Albert Einstein's name has become synonymous with genius, but the journey to his revolutionary theory of relativity was not simply the result of tireless calculation. It was also shaped by an unusual dream, one that left a vivid, lasting impression on his mind and steered his thoughts toward the nature of space, time, and light. Einstein often spoke about a dream he had in his late teenage years, before he became the towering figure of modern physics. In this dream, he found himself on a hillside, watching the sky in awe. Suddenly, he was riding on a sled, moving faster and faster down the slope. The speed kept increasing, and soon he was racing so quickly that the colors of the sky began to change. The stars shimmered differently, and the light around him seemed to bend in strange ways. As he approached the speed of light, the world took on a surreal, distorted appearance. Time and space in the dream seemed fluid, no longer behaving in the ways he had always known. When he awoke, Einstein could not shake the feeling that the dream was more than just a fleeting image from his sleeping mind. It felt like a glimpse into a hidden order of the universe, one where the familiar rules of everyday life no longer applied. He became fascinated with the idea of what would happen if one could actually travel at the speed of light. How would time behave? Would distances shrink or stretch? Could the very perception of reality change under such conditions? This vision became the seed of what he later called a thought experiment, a method that would define much of his work. Instead of relying solely on laboratory equipment, Einstein would use the laboratory of his own imagination. The dream of riding at light speed inspired him to start imagining observers, clocks, and rulers moving at different velocities, and to question how these would measure time in space. Years later, as a young physicist working in the Swiss Patent Office, Einstein continued to nurture this idea. In 1905, this seed would blossom into his special theory of relativity, a work that redefined the fundamental relationship between space and time. He proposed that the speed of light is constant for all observers, and that time and space are not fixed but relative, changing depending on the observer's motion. The dream from his youth had evolved into a scientific framework that challenged centuries of Newtonian thought. Einstein himself acknowledged the influence of his dream on his later breakthroughs. It was not that the dream contained the equations or technical details of relativity, but rather that it opened his mind to possibilities that were far from ordinary intuition. It gave him a mental image that bridged the gap between abstract mathematics and the concrete experience of imagining oneself in motion through the universe. Even after special relativity, Einstein did not stop. A decade later, he extended his ideas into the general theory of relativity, which described how gravity itself is the curvature of spacetime caused by massive objects. And though general relativity was based on years of rigorous calculation and observation, the spark that began it all could be traced back to that youthful dream, the sensation of rushing toward the edge of light. The story of Einstein's dream is a reminder that great scientific ideas often have roots in moments of pure imagination. While the equations of relativity were grounded in logic, experiment, and mathematics, the inspiration came from a place beyond conscious reasoning, from a fleeting vision in sleep that refused to fade. It is a testament to the mind's ability to blend creativity with logic, turning a surreal nighttime journey into a theory that would forever change humanity's understanding of the cosmos. In the end, Einstein's dream was not just about racing through the sky. It was about breaking through the boundaries of what was considered possible. And from that, he showed the world that time and space themselves are far more mysterious and beautiful than anyone had imagined. Insulin discovery, Frederick Banting's dream. In the early 20th century, a diagnosis of diabetes was almost always a death sentence. The disease was poorly understood, and for those with what we now know as type 1 diabetes, the body's inability to produce insulin meant certain and often rapid decline. Treatments at the time were grim. Patients were put on starvation diets to prolong life for a few extra months, sometimes a year, but nothing could truly halt the fatal progression. Frederick Banting was a young Canadian doctor with little research experience when a dream, or perhaps a half-waking vision, set him on a path that would change medical history. In October of 1920, Banting had gone to bed exhausted, weighed down by personal and financial struggles. At the time, he was running a small medical practice that barely had patients, supplementing his income by teaching physiology at the University of Western Ontario. His lectures often touched on the pancreas and its role in digestion, though the endocrine function of this organ remained mysterious to many. That night, Banting drifted into uneasy sleep. In his dream, he saw vivid, almost textbook-like images of the pancreas. He envisioned himself surgically tying off certain ducts within it, allowing the digestive enzymes to break down, but leaving intact a mysterious internal secretion, the substance he instinctively knew was missing in diabetic patients. In the dream, this process seemed crystal clear, as though a guiding voice had whispered the exact steps to follow. He awoke abruptly in the early hours of the morning, his mind still buzzing with the strange clarity of the vision. Fearing he might forget, he grabbed a notebook and wrote, "Tie off pancreatic ducts of dogs. Wait several weeks for the exocrine part to degenerate. Isolate the internal secretion to relieve glycosuria." It was not poetic, but it was precise, the seed of the experiment that would lead to the isolation of insulin. The next day, Banting took his idea to John MacLeod, a respected professor of physiology at the University of Toronto. MacLeod was skeptical. Many researchers had tried and failed to extract the pancreas's internal secretion, and Banting had neither the equipment nor the specialized training for such a delicate project. Yet something in Banting's enthusiasm, or perhaps the bold specificity of his dream-inspired method, convinced MacLeod to give him a chance. He provided Banting with lab space, 10 experimental dogs, and a young medical student, Charles Best, to assist. The summer of 1921 became a grueling test of both the dream's validity and Banting's endurance. The experiments were painstaking and often heartbreaking, as the dogs underwent surgery and careful observation. Following his dream's instructions, Banting tied off the pancreatic ducts, waited for the tissue to degenerate, and then worked to extract the hormone from what remained. The results were far from immediate. Early attempts produced unstable extracts, and some animals died before results could be measured. But in July, they had a breakthrough. A diabetic dog given the crude extract showed a dramatic drop in blood sugar and regained some strength. Banting's dream had moved from the realm of imagination into tangible, life-saving reality. Refining the process became the next challenge. With MacLeod's guidance and the help of biochemist James Collip, the team developed a purer form of the extract, which they soon named insulin. In January 1922, insulin was given to 14-year-old Leonard Thompson, a boy dying of severe diabetes. The first injection, though impure, produced only slight improvement. After further refinement, Leonard received a second injection, and this time the results were astonishing. His symptoms improved dramatically, and he lived for another 13 years. News of the discovery spread quickly, and insulin production began on a large scale, saving thousands of lives within a few years. In 1923, Banting and MacLeod were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, a decision that caused tension, as Banting felt Best deserved the honor instead of MacLeod. In a gesture of loyalty, Banting shared his prize money with Best, and MacLeod shared his with Collip. What remained unshakable, however, was Banting's belief that his strange dream had been the catalyst for the discovery. He would often speak of that night in October 1920 as the moment everything began, the instant when the subconscious, fueled by years of scattered knowledge and intuition, delivered a fully formed idea. The discovery of insulin was not just a triumph of science. It was a testament to the unpredictable ways human inspiration works. Banting's dream bridged the gap between scattered research findings and a practical method that could be tested in the real world. Without it, the breakthrough might have come years later or not at all. Today, insulin remains one of the most important medical discoveries in history, saving millions of lives every year. And it all began in the quiet darkness of a small Ontario bedroom, with a dream that refused to fade when morning came. The idea for Twilight, Stephenie Meyer's dream. In June 2003, Stephenie Meyer was an unpublished writer, a young mother living in Arizona with no concrete plans to create one of the most famous book series of the 21st century. She had no literary background in the sense of formal training, no agents waiting for her manuscripts, no audience anticipating her work. Then, one night, she had a dream that would alter the trajectory of her life and eventually the pop culture landscape. In this dream, Meyer found herself watching an intense, almost cinematic scene. It took place in a sunny meadow, not the dry heat of the Arizona desert she knew, but a lush, green place, filled with the hum of life. At the center of this vision were two characters, a young human girl and an otherworldly, impossibly beautiful young man. They were lying in the grass, speaking quietly but with an undercurrent of great tension. The girl, she understood instinctively, was in love with him. The boy, however, was no ordinary human. He was a vampire, one who felt an irresistible urge to drink her blood. What made this dream stand out to Meyer was not only the striking imagery but the emotions it carried. The vampire boy was conflicted, torn between a deep attraction to the girl and an equally powerful instinct to destroy her. The girl, in turn, was aware of the danger, but instead of fear, she felt trust and fascination. The conversation between them carried a mixture of tenderness, longing, and danger. This combination of love and mortal risk formed the emotional core of the scene, and in the dream, it felt both intoxicating and heartbreaking. When Meyer awoke, she couldn't shake the vividness of the moment. She saw the boy's pale, luminous skin, his almost unnatural beauty, and his golden eyes that hinted at some strange hunger. She remembered the girl's calm voice as she spoke about her feelings despite knowing she was in peril. It was more than a fleeting dream. It was the skeleton of a story. Fearing that the details might fade, Meyer sat down that very morning and began to write what she remembered. She described the meadow, the way sunlight refracted off the boy's skin as if it were made of crystal, and the strange, charged dialogue between them. This scene would later become what fans know as Chapter 13, Confessions in the first Twilight book, almost word for word from her dream. But something happened when she started writing. She found herself wondering about the backstory. Who were these characters? Why was the vampire so drawn to the girl? Why was he different from other vampires in the stories she had heard? Soon, Meyer began shaping a mythology. Her vampires would be unique. Not the gothic monsters of horror films, but a blend of danger and allure, possessing superhuman abilities and an unusual relationship with sunlight. She named the girl Bella Swan, an ordinary human in many respects, meant to act as a relatable anchor for the reader. The vampire became Edward Cullen, a character both cursed and blessed by his immortality. From the meadow scene, Meyer worked both forward and backward in time, crafting a plot that would explain their meeting, the conflicts that would arise from their relationship, and the dangerous world that surrounded them. For 3 months, Meyer wrote obsessively, often late into the night. The story poured out of her in long, uninterrupted sessions. She claimed in interviews that it felt less like inventing something and more like watching a movie in her head and transcribing what she saw. By the end of summer 2003, she had a complete manuscript, the first draft of Twilight. With encouragement from her sister, she began querying literary agents. Many rejections followed, but one agent saw the potential in her manuscript and took her on as a client. Within months, Twilight was sold to a major publisher. When the book was released in 2005, it became a sensation. Its mixture of teenage romance, supernatural mystery, and moral tension struck a chord with millions of readers, especially young adults. Critics debated its literary merits, but there was no denying its cultural impact. Sequels followed New Moon, Eclipse, and Breaking Dawn, expanding the world that began in that single dream. The popularity of the books led to a blockbuster film series, further embedding Bella and Edward's story into modern pop culture. Meyer's dream, once a private moment in her subconscious, had grown into a billion-dollar franchise, translated into dozens of languages, and adapted into movies that drew global audiences. Stephenie Meyer has often spoken about the origin of her saga, acknowledging that without that one vivid dream, Twilight might never have existed. The meadow scene, in many ways, remained the emotional centerpiece of the entire series, a reminder of the delicate balance between love and danger that first appeared to her while she slept. From a purely creative standpoint, Meyer's experience shows the power of dreams not only to inspire a single image or feeling, but to spark an entire fictional universe. It was not a carefully planned project or a calculated attempt to write for a particular market. It was an unplanned vision, preserved through quick action, and nurtured into a story that connected with millions. What began as a quiet, personal dream in June 2003 became one of the defining works of paranormal romance in the 21st century. And for Meyer, it was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most extraordinary ideas do not come from long hours of conscious effort. They come uninvited, in the stillness of sleep, waiting to be caught before they fade. Table of musical notes, Giuseppe Tartini's Dream. In the early 18th century, Europe was alive with the sounds of Baroque music. It was a time when composers explored the boundaries of harmony and melody, driven by both formal training and the occasional spark of inspiration that seemed to come from nowhere. Giuseppe Tartini, a virtuoso violinist and composer from Italy, was one of those figures who seemed to live with music flowing through his veins. Known for his technical mastery and deep emotional expression, Tartini was already a respected musician when a single dream would alter the course of his creative life and leave behind a piece of music that would gain near-mythical status. Tartini often described himself as a restless perfectionist, always searching for a sound that could perfectly express the feelings he carried inside. But in 1713, an experience came to him not through practice or conscious effort, but in the surreal and vivid world of a dream. One night, he fell into a deep sleep and found himself in a strange, otherworldly setting. In this dream, he claimed to have encountered the devil himself. According to Tartini's own account, the figure appeared not in a terrifying or grotesque form, but with a presence that was commanding and impossible to ignore. In the dream, Tartini offered his soul in exchange for musical mastery beyond human reach. The devil accepted, took up a violin, and began to play a piece of such extraordinary beauty and technical brilliance that Tartini felt both awe and despair. The music was unlike anything he had ever heard, flowing with perfect clarity, every note charged with a kind of dark elegance that seemed to reach beyond earthly skill. He stood there, captivated, as the devil's bow danced across the strings, weaving melodies that seemed to exist outside the limits of human imagination. When Tartini awoke, his heart was still racing. The music from the dream echoed in his mind, and he immediately reached for his violin, desperate to capture what he had heard. But translating the perfection of that dream performance into reality proved impossible. No matter how hard he tried, the piece he wrote down felt like only a shadow of the music the devil had played. Still, what emerged from that fevered attempt was the Devil's Trill Sonata, one of the most technically demanding and emotionally intense works ever written for the violin. The sonata was built around rapid trills and double stops, techniques that pushed violin playing to its limits at the time. Tartini poured every ounce of his skill into recreating the essence of that dream, and while he believed he never truly matched the original, the result was a masterpiece that secured his place in music history. Musicians who attempted the piece were challenged not only by its technical requirements but also by its emotional depth. It wasn't enough to simply play the notes. One had to channel the strange, almost supernatural passion that seemed embedded in its core. Years later, Tartini would still speak of that dream, calling it both a blessing and a curse. He admitted that hearing perfection and then spending a lifetime chasing it was both inspiring and frustrating. The Devil's Trill Sonata became his most famous work, and the story of its origin added to its mystique. Audiences were fascinated by the idea that such a piece could have been gifted in a dream, as if some unseen force had reached into the human world to pass along a fragment of otherworldly beauty. The legend of Tartini's dream spread far beyond Italy, feeding into the romantic ideal of the tortured artist, touched by forces beyond comprehension. Musicians and listeners alike were drawn to the idea that music could be born from visions, that genius might sometimes arrive not through years of study alone, but through a moment of surreal, dreamlike clarity. For Tartini, the Devil's Trill Sonata remained both a triumph and a reminder of something he could never fully grasp again. Yet perhaps that was its power. It carried within it the mystery of its creation, a reminder that some of the greatest works of human creativity begin not in the conscious mind, but in the strange and unpredictable landscapes of dreams. Even today, centuries later, the piece continues to inspire awe. Violinists still approach it with both excitement and trepidation, knowing they are stepping into the same chase Tartini began in that fateful dream. The pursuit of perfection glimpsed, but never entirely caught. And so, the music lives on, a haunting echo of a night when a sleeping composer claimed to hear the devil play. The periodic motion of pendulums, Galileo Galilei's observation dream. The city of Pisa in the late 16th century was a place of bustling trade, religious devotion, and an emerging culture of learning. Among its many citizens, one young man was beginning to question the old ways of thinking. Galileo Galilei, the son of a musician, was meant to study medicine at the University of Pisa, but his restless mind was already drifting toward mathematics, mechanics, and the secrets of motion. Galileo was endlessly curious about how the world worked, and he had a keen eye for patterns that others might overlook. But one of his most famous insights didn't come to him in the laboratory or through painstaking calculation. It came from a quiet, almost dreamlike observation in a cathedral. The story goes back to the 1580s when Galileo was still a student. One day, while attending Mass at the Cathedral of Pisa, he found himself distracted by a large bronze chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. The air in the church was heavy with incense, and as the service continued, the chandelier began to sway gently. The movement was slow and hypnotic, like a pendulum rocking back and forth. As Galileo watched, something remarkable struck him. The swings seemed to take the same amount of time, no matter how far the chandelier moved. At first, he thought this might be a trick of the eye, but his curiosity took over. Lacking a clock, Galileo used his own pulse to measure the swings. Counting quietly to himself, he realized that the time for each oscillation, whether the arc was large or small, was astonishingly constant. This observation stayed with him long after the service ended. That night, as he drifted off to sleep, Galileo's mind returned to the vision of the swinging chandelier. In his dreams, the motion transformed. The cathedral ceiling faded away, and he saw hundreds of pendulums swinging in unison, their steady rhythm echoing through a dark and silent space. Some were large, with wide arcs. Others were small, barely moving at all. Yet in his dream, they all seemed to keep perfect time, their motion connected by an invisible law of nature. When Galileo awoke, the dream felt almost prophetic. He couldn't shake the idea that this property, the equal timing of swings regardless of amplitude, might be universal. In the days and weeks that followed, he began experimenting with small pendulums at home, using strings and metal weights. Again and again, he confirmed what his dream and observation had suggested. The period of a pendulum depends primarily on its length, not the size of its swing. This realization became the foundation of the law of isochronism of pendulums. At a time when mechanical clocks were still inaccurate and prone to error, Galileo saw the potential for pendulums to regulate time with unprecedented precision. Although he never built a fully functional pendulum clock himself, his work laid the groundwork for Christian Huygens, who would construct the first one decades later, revolutionizing timekeeping. But beyond the practical application, Galileo's pendulum moment was a testament to his genius for blending observation with imagination. Many people had seen that chandelier in the cathedral. Many had watched it sway, but only Galileo had the presence of mind to measure it with his pulse, to notice its perfect regularity, and to follow the thought into the realm of dreams, where his subconscious could explore the possibilities without limits. In later years, Galileo would face great trials for his scientific views, but he always valued the role of observation in discovery. The swaying chandelier remained one of his favorite examples of how nature reveals its secrets in the smallest, most ordinary moments, and how a curious mind must be ready to catch them. Today, the story of Galileo's dreamlike observation is told as a reminder that inspiration often strikes when we are still, patient, and open to wonder. Whether in the quiet of a cathedral, the flicker of a candle flame, or the rhythm of a heartbeat, there are patterns waiting to be seen, and perhaps, like Galileo, we only need to watch closely enough to turn them into something that will change the world. If you want, I can also expand this into a more cinematic, meditative narrative in the style of your relaxing history videos, adding more sensory detail, internal monologue, and a slow unfolding of the moment so it feels immersive. That would make it even richer and longer. Ending. And so, my friends, what seemed like a simple swaying of a chandelier in a cathedral led Galileo to an insight that would change our understanding of motion and time. Sometimes, inspiration does not arrive in the laboratory or at the workbench, but in quiet moments, when we simply observe the world around us. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to support the channel. Give it a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe that such small moments can truly change the course of history? And share this video with your friends. Perhaps it will spark their own ideas and discoveries.